24 hours into the job, Becky. Congratulations. And how do you plan to begin this really crucial 3-year term at such a time as this?
So thank you, first of all. It's hard. People have been asking me how I feel about this moment. And, to say that I'm excited and humbled and honored to be asked to serve at this moment. I am weighing against the somberness and the seriousness of what we're facing right now. There's no one more than our teachers and our support staff, our parents, of course, who want our students to be in school. I don't think there's anyone that thought we would still be in the throes of this pandemic at the start of a school year, but here we are. And the reality is that the federal government has not shown the leadership that we needed to put our schools in a position to open safely. They've not been leading with all of the guidelines, and they certainly have not done their job to provide the resources to ensure that our schools are safe. And so what our educators and our parents and community members all are saying, if they're not safe, then we cannot open them. That is absolutely the first order of business, is our students have to be safe. And they're not safe if they don't have, if that community, their infection rates are not low for 2 weeks. They're not safe. If we don't have masks and protective equipment, they're not safe if the students can't socially distance. They're not safe if they can't provide healthcare checks and testing. They're not safe if they don't have plans in place for when, not if, but when the students get sick or educators get sick, and we have to figure out how we isolate them and protect the other students and the community and their parents.
So, Becky, Representative Donna Shalala just told us that there's still a gap between Republicans and Democrats on the amount of money that should go both to schools and to states, some of which would then go on to schools. At what point will you actually go on strike, or will you vote, for strike action? What is the amount of money that's the minimum that you would need in order for, strike action to be avoided?
So just like the coronavirus, the impact of this pandemic is impacting communities in different ways. So we have communities and states with very high infection rates and soaring. We have some that have controlled it. They've done everything they can to take the precautions and have brought it under control. What we are saying is that from community to community, state to state, school district to school district, they need to take a look at those infection rates, and they need to know what resources they need in that area. I'm glad you mentioned, because this was in the HEROES Act, I'm glad you mentioned that it's not only the funding that's going directly to schools, it also is the funding that's going to states and localities. Because here's the thing, I think we all know, or maybe we don't, that the funding for our schools has never recovered from the 2008 recession. We are still suffering the loss of losing that education funding from over 12 years ago. And we already have, because of the economic crisis in our states and localities, we've already had almost 1 million educators that were laid off. And we are predicting, if the crisis doesn't end, or really within the next couple of years, that we'll have at least 2 million more. And so we know that the funding has to include not only direct funding for schools, without those ties to being in school or in school buildings or not. We know that funding has to go directly to schools. We know we need allocated funding to close the digital gap, and we need help in our states to make sure that our communities...
So, Becky, this has been the position of the NEA for some time. Who are you speaking to in Congress to try and make that gap go away or get narrow? And if it doesn't, what will you do?
Well, we're uniting our 3 million members and anyone who likes them or loves them or intends to keep living with them to lobby their members of Congress, their senators, and their members in Congress too, because we need our Congress people to be firm in ensuring that we get the funding we need for our states, for our locals, for the schools, for all of them. And so we are mounting up those efforts. But we're not just doing that. You've been seeing that schools have been opening or planning to open. As you said, the larger districts are realizing this is impossible to keep everyone safe. And so they are going virtual. But what we're focusing on is the reality that even the schools that have opened, they are now starting to shut down either by school or by district. And we know that we have got to do better with the online, the virtual learning that we're
Right, because you just mentioned the digital divide as well, and Arnie Duncan
Yes.
not long ago on Bloomberg TV also said that we also need to take care of, you know, students' physical and emotional and mental health, but specifically food security. A lot of kids are depending on, you know, being in school to get food. Becky, what does the NEA do about that?
Exactly. And that's why I said it's important. The entire Heroes package is important because we know that our families and communities are suffering. And so at the NEA, you saw this in the spring, and we're ramping up that work now. But you saw this in the spring where our school bus drivers were driving around buses full of lunches and dinners. And we weren't just providing it for our students. I applaud those districts that understood that their families were hungry as well. And so we were reaching out and building partnerships with organizations within the community to expand that reach and to begin to try to address some of the food insecurity that quite honestly already existed. We knew that our students were relying on us to eat, and many of those students took part of that food home to their families. But of course, that was exacerbated. So in the pandemic. And so we are ramping up those efforts, working within the community, supporting food pantries, starting food pantries of our own to ensure that our students are fed, because we know if they're hungry, they can't learn.